And this, I think, leans into some of the ancillary issues we were talking about in the first question. We're talking about protected speech at work. The line between free expression and workplace disruption is thinner than ever, vis-a-vis diverticulitis, clearly. But a T-shirt or a sticker on a laptop or a comment can spark conflict, or worse, create legal exposure. So, Tom, to start us off, what types of speech are legally protected in the workplace and what isn't? I am often surprised when I hear you talk about this.
Not much is protected in the legal sense. So let's use an example. Steve is my employee, and Steve wants to talk about some political issue that's on his mind. And he starts doing so, where I can generally prohibit him from doing that in the workplace because he has no free speech under the First Amendment rights. He can protest the local school budget because he wants to go. He can protest immigration issues out on his own outside of work, not identify with the workplace. He could stand at a rally. He could do anything he would, not in his own personal life, because that's him against some organization, some governmental function, something like that. The one exception really is the National Labor Relations Act, which does provide protected speech about terms and conditions of employment. So let's say, I don't know, hard to come up with an example right off the top of my head, but a company says they impose a policy, and Steve said they impose a policy saying they're no longer going to check the brakes on the vehicles.
Okay.
And I know, crazy policy. And
Right.
Steve says, well, I drive one of these vehicles. I want you to do that. And starts protesting that. That's protected. It's a term and condition of work. You have to make sure the brakes work properly. That would be a valid reason for doing so.
Okay, that one of the explicit points in this question was clothing. Can an employer prohibit political dress or symbols on the job? Where is the line there? I'm imagining someone who says, I'm coming to work and I'm wearing the expected garb of the job. Maybe I'm wearing a suit. Maybe I'm wearing a jumpsuit for working in a factory, but I'm wearing maybe a pin that supports one party or one issue or another. It's tasteful, and yet I'm speaking my individuality and my belief. Where's the line there?
Just about that. The pin comes off at work. As long as you're consistent. If you're consistent, if I let Steve do it, but I don't let you, that's a problem.
Okay.
That's a real problem by the company. You've got to be consistent across the board and say, you can't wear, there was a case here in Massachusetts out of the Black Lives Matter movement when George Floyd was killed years ago. And there was a great deal of protest about Black Lives Matter and people wearing masks at work or T-shirts. There's a big court case in Massachusetts involving Whole Foods, the food company, and people had on masks, what have you. And the courts came back saying that no, that was not protected speech. The company could ban that.
Okay. So it sounds like my next question for Steve was around HR sort of gray zones in this area. But Steve, it sounds like, according to Tom, there aren't that many gray zones.
There really aren't. And in a way that makes it a lot easier for companies. I had my former HR manager many years ago who said, just remember, your constitutional rights of free speech end the moment you walk through that front door to our office.
Right.
Now you have to follow our rules. Now, he could have said it better.
Indelicate.
It was a little indelicate, but his point was 100% valid. But you also, you don't want to be so restrictive that employees perceive it as if you're stifling the culture, or as if you don't trust them to make just basic conversational decisions. There's issues where, I'm in the lunchroom. I'm on my own time and having this conversation. You can't tell me what to do if I'm on my own time.
Right.
And that's another challenge that I've had where, once again, it's, yes, I can tell you, even though you're not on the clock and we're not paying you for your time off, you're still sitting in our office.
Right.
But you want to be specific. You want to make it clear, and you want to keep the policies narrow and focused on harmful behaviors or things that are going to disrupt. If you ban like all speech about everything, that can really have engagement and loyalty drop. I mean, people feel that you don't trust them, that they constantly have to censor every single thing they say. And that is not a culture you want to build. So you do have to walk, again, it's that gray area, it's that fine line between allowing people to have those water cooler conversations, which are actually extremely helpful in team building and bonding. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, saying there are certain things that are just off limits.
Well, not just that we don't want to build a culture that says that there are where people feel stifled. I also recognize that the cases we hear about are cases around escalation when employees feel their identity is threatened. How do you recommend HR managers de-escalate or redirect sensitive conversations without sounding punitive, right? Or defensive on behalf of the company, giving themselves a bad sort of hyper-protective reputation?
Mm-hmm. Again, it depends on the circumstance. If it's a situation where you can take somebody aside and say, I need to let you know that, I overheard this conversation and it wasn't really appropriate and you need to avoid that. You don't want to publicly shame or embarrass somebody by saying, shut up, stop talking. There are circumstances, though, where you do have to nip it in the bud. Mm-hmm. If it's going down a track of the bringing up Tom's expression of the validity of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, rather than whether, you're advertising for it or not, is it valid? That's something you're going to have to stop quickly. You cannot wait for them to talk and take them aside.
Okay.
There are a couple of exceptions, Pete, to be mindful of. One of them would be whistleblowers. People have speech they need to. If I'm going to go to report something to Steve as HR, I may need to give him more detail and more information about something than I would normally do, or he would normally tolerate within the workplace, but I have to do it for whatever reason. I overheard a conversation. I overheard whatever it is. Same thing with reporting discrimination. If I'm going to have to share information, share details that Steve might be like, I wouldn't want this in a normal setting, but I'm going to hear it now, and that's life. Because I overheard a conversation between two people that using language that was inappropriate, or using that I would not otherwise find acceptable in the workplace, but I need to report it. So there are some sort of public policy exceptions, if you will.
Well, and I mean, it seems easy for us to say right now that the line is pretty clear, and yet, what you are describing seems like a rich tableau for someone to respond that my organization doesn't respect diverse perspectives. My organization is now suddenly a reporting culture. We all have to be super careful of everything we say because anyone is listening and they could report you at any time. I'm curious as we wrap up this particular question, and we're a little bit long on time, but what do you see as effective strategies for preserving culture while respecting that sort of diversity?
I would say, kind of repeating what I said before, make sure if you have a policy, it's narrow and it's focused on behavior that can be offensive to people. Okay. Talking about the weather, presumably, is not offensive to most people. If you start, going to, again, that's an extreme example, but if you start doing that, people are going to feel that they're being censored and you don't trust them. So you just have to make sure that it's specific. And the intent is to prevent harm, not to prevent people from talking and just having normal conversations.
Right.
It's protecting employees.
Yeah. Tom, thoughts?
The truth is, in a lot of workplace cultures, I always have thoughts. The truth is, in a lot of workplace cultures, you're going to see passing comments, political of nature. It says something. Did you see this? And the other person nods, or I say, yeah, I know, I can't believe this, whatever. That's going to happen. It's when it becomes dumb. If I say I'll no longer work with Steve because I don't like his politics, that's a problem. That's where companies really get concerned, is that I don't pay Steve and Tom to work, to be politically arguing. I pay them to do a job as an employer. And that's where the trying to back to Steve's point about a fine line.
Yeah. I want to respect time here because we have, we